group on various platforms like on Facebook and LinkedIn, et cetera, where they could all be kind of tied together,
Yeah.
maybe have people develop a sense of community around this, and maybe even collaborate with others who are doing something similar. I know at least a couple of folks that are doing veteran focused groups that are there to support people in business, et cetera. So,
Right.
I'm thinking kind of along those lines, but yeah, I think it's important what we're doing here with giving people a platform and encouraging people to tell their military stories. I was kind of I was reinforced with that. I wasn't expecting it actually. When with my nonprofit, we had our first public event back on August 10th in San Diego on the deck of the USS Midway, where we
Mm-hmm.
presented the book that we created for the family of machinist mate first class Alfonso Abdel Amos.
Mm-hmm.
And the writer of the book is a Air Force Academy graduate who spent his time as a criminal investigator for the Air Force and had written several other books prior to writing this for us. And when he was talking at the presentation, he was talking about how the experience of doing this helped him to get past the idea that his own story was unimportant, because
Okay.
so many of us that, I mean, I'll include myself in this too, because, the folks that um, are out there on the battlefield are supported by a lot of other folks that never see combat, that are never
Mm-hmm.
put in the
And I
line of
think that's
fire, so
something.
to
Oh,
speak.
go ahead.
And so we kind of discount that. We say, okay, well, it's not as important. It's not as, it was just doing my job, etc. And what he said is that he realized through writing the story of this man, that his own story was important too. And so that he basically wrote his own book about his own story. I'm not saying everybody should write the book necessarily, but I think people should tell their stories. I think that they're important. I think they touch more people than we realize by hearing them. So anyway, that's and I don't know exactly what your story is going to be, but I'm looking forward to hearing it. So
Yeah, and I think that that's a good point. I guess before I go into my story, I think working in my business, the Gold Beacon that I started and founded was to develop nonprofits and to develop social change organizations because a lot of times you nonprofits get busy.
yes.
Kimberly, you want to tell us who you
Are
are?
started. There's
Well, I
Go
think
ahead, say
something
again.
froze up. I heard you were in the middle of saying something and the screen
Can
froze. So I
can you hear me okay?
Yes.
can hear you fine now. Yes. So let's go ahead and get started. Then let's
Let's
for
see.
the sake
Let me
of
get you on a
our
different internet
recording,
connection.
if you could start out by telling us who you are, tell us a little bit about your military service in terms of time, what you did briefly there, and then carte blanche to talk about everything else that you want to talk about. And if
Yes,
you
I
have photos and videos, do you have any of those you want to share with us? I think we have to give you permission to screen share if that's the case.
yeah, I can share a few of those.
Okay.
I'll pull up a few of them here in a moment. Let me do that. If I start trying to click on things and talk at the same time, I start doing some crazy
Right.
stuff. So let me click
Like
on
us.
those really quick.
Bob, does Maddie need to give her access to do that?
Wait, what are we doing here? I'm
Uh,
sorry.
she- Kimberly needs to be able to share her screen because she's got some photos to share with us in her story.
Eddie, you want to set that up? Mehedi,
Yes.
you want to set up Kimberly as like a co-host or share her
Sure.
screen?
Sure, sure.
All right,
Okay. All right, so are we good to go?
I think so.
Okay. All right. So, hello, everyone. My name is Kim Henry, and I'm super excited to be here. I do always say my pronouns, which are she, her, and hers. And I'll kind of explain why I say that. If I start to freeze or go out, you can't hear me anymore, please stop me, and I'll see what I can do about the internet connection. I live in West Texas, and so sometimes crazy things can happen. So, please let me know if there's something happens with the connection. But I'm very excited to be here. I was asked to talk to y'all today about a little bit about my story, which I thought was pretty interesting because, the first thing I thought about was that I'm not a Gold Star family. I am a first generation sailor, and going back into the history of my family who has served in my family, I would have to go very, very far back. And I don't really know anyone in my family who's ever served in the military. And then my little brother joined after me. And actually, I'll share a picture of that real quick. This is my brother and I. Um, it was not my plan to join the military. So if you can imagine a small town girl from Kansas who grew up in a single parent home, low income rural family. And I had a scholarship, quite a good scholarship actually, to debates in college. But because the Navy offered a paycheck, consistent paycheck, and to pay for school and to give me a top secret clearance, it sounded a little bit more stable. And I joined the military right after high school, and that definitely was not the plan. Um, but shortly after that, a couple of years later, my brother graduated high school and he joined. And in this picture, actually, this is my third deployment. You can see in the background is the USS Carl Vinson. That was my ship that I was deployed on. That was a 10-month deployment for Operation Inherent Resolve, where we were pretty much bringing the fight against ISIS for those 10 months. And as my ship was leaving the Gulf, his ship, the one we're standing on, was going to continue that fight. And that was very difficult because this was his first big deployment. And it was an around the world deployment for them, the Theodore Roosevelts, because they were changing home ports when they returned. So it was a complete round the world deployment for them. And I believed he didn't know what he was getting into. Being on a 10-month deployment, he was an engineer, as you can see in his red uniform. I was intel, so I didn't have to get my hands as dirty as he did all the time. He didn't understand. I didn't think he didn't understand what his working hours were going to look like, the challenges he was going to have ahead of him. Um, but also by this time, I had been in the Navy for 6 years. And being in the Navy for 6 years, I had seen a lot. And this being my third deployment, I had experienced a lot. Um, and it really wasn't until the time that my brother joined the Navy, about 2 years prior to this picture, that I started treating people or started seeing things a little bit different. I had always taken care of everyone. My last name is Henry. People call me Mother Hen. Um, but I really didn't understand what it was like to treat someone like your brother and sister. Um, it, it wasn't until, they say in the military, they're your brothers and sisters in arms. But it's not until your sibling joins the military, your family joins the military and you're serving with them, that you actually understand, to me, what that really means. For me, that experience, uh, I can completely relate to people being downrange, and saying what that brother and sister bond means to them. Um, I've never been downrange. I have done 2 combat deployments, and my first deployment was in Japan, where I was when the tsunami happened back in 2011. But I've never kicked indoors. I've never been shot at, technically. I've never had to shoot someone, technically. Um, being intel, I just have the big red buttons I say that I could push, but from afar. And so I really didn't grasp that life or death situation, that high risk, immediate danger situation. And so I didn't really not necessarily understand, but when you're standing on this ship, as I am in this picture with your little brother who you pretty much raised, and you're having to leave him and basically to serve the deployment you just served, um, going through the exhaustion and the 10 months that you just went through, but knowing his is going to be much worse being an engineer. Um, I mean, all I did was cry when I left on the helicopter. I just could not stop crying, and I had not cried like that in I don't know how long. And all my helicopter friends are like, "Are you okay?" Uh, I was just so heartbroken and just so scared for him, um, because who was going to take care of him, right? And it was difficult to leave him. And so, when I was asked to speak today, I was just interested, of course, and appreciative to be here, but I was also, very concerned because I said I'm not a Gold Star family. I have not lost anyone in my family. However, I have lost a lot of people that I'm close to, mostly by, unfortunately, suicide, people that have died by suicide in the military. And both these two people in this picture, myself and my brother, have experienced thoughts of suicide because of our experiences in the military. And luckily, we're still here today. Uh, but I think that's something to consider. And Dennis, you were mentioning, how can we engage other people? And
Yes,
I'll talk a little bit about this in my story, but how can we engage more communities? There are a lot of different organizations or communities uh, that support or discuss or advocate for Gold Star families. And a lot of them are combat focused. And, I actually have a service dog. Her name is Daisy, and I advocate a lot for what mental health looks like and what being a veteran looks like. Uh, and I get asked a lot, were you in the military? That's the first question I get asked, and I say yes. And the second question that I always get asked is, were you in combat? And I say yes. Technically, I was in combat zone twice. Um, However, what that does is that creates this idea that unless you were in combat, hand-to-hand combat or kicking in doors, um, then you really didn't have hard military service, or you really didn't do anything worthy in your military service. And it kind of takes away from what people go through when they serve in the military, right?
exactly.
It takes away from the fact that when I got on that helicopter, I had to really fight to be able to get on the helicopter, because a lot of people don't know, but the Navy, if you have two ships crossing paths in this situation, if there's like a mother and a child, or like a husband and a spouse, they'll let you go fly on the helicopter over to the other ship like I did. But if for siblings, it's not always the case. We're kind of down farther on the list. And so I had to really advocate for myself to go see my brother. Luckily, I was intel and in a leadership position. So I had to take some intel documents and stuff over to the other ship. But that helped, fight my case. But um, that's not always the case. And so I would have gone almost 3 years without seeing him if I didn't get to fly on that ship for about 2 hours, to his ship for about 2 hours. And so I say that because this idea that veterans are broken, or people in the military are broken, and we're all broken because of combat service, is very harmful in so many ways. And I'll talk again when I get to my story. I want to bring that up because that is how I believe that you could engage with other communities, because there are a lot of Gold Star families that are not just Gold Star families because they're I don't want to say just. I hate using that word just, because I feel like it takes away from the power of these families. But there are a lot of families that are Gold Star families, for reasons other than combat.
Correct.
And I think if you can engage with communities who have lost their service member for other reasons other than combat, such as suicide or unfortunately even murder, um, or I mean even DUI or other accidents, even training accidents. A lot of people, if you do research, like and you look at World War II, how many people were lost in World War II because of training accidents, and the equipment is astronomical. And a lot of people don't recognize that.
Yeah,
Right.
our nonprofit is open to all of those. In fact, our first
Yes.
story is of a non-combat death, so loss.
Yes.
So
And that's what I love about your organization. And so I think a lot of them don't necessarily open it to that. And so I think if you really promote that, that would be incredible because again, as someone who is not a Gold Star family, and does not want to ever take parallel or relate to someone who is a Gold Star family, because I cannot relate to that. I've never experienced that. Um, it's it's important to recognize that we all have our own story. And so my story starts again joining the Navy at 18. I left and went to boot camp, and I was found boot camp to be really easy. So I won't talk about that too long. It was easy because because I could multitask a lot. Um, I don't know what's the next. Here's another picture of us on the ship together. Um, Boot camp was easy for me because I was just able to run a household. I mean, I was able just to manage a lot. 80 people in one room, that's fine, no problem. I got it, even as an 18-year-old. Handling that many emotions at the same time, that was a lot. That was the hardest part for me, is managing that many women in one room. That was a lot for me. I was kind of more of just like, let's get this done. We don't have time for that kind of, drama. I was in charge of laundry, which is kind of silly, but we never got a hit on any inspection, and I did it so well, and I restructured how things were done, um, that it kind of restructured everything and in the entire building. So I actually got promoted for that in boot camp. I went on to Florida, where I got my training, and then I finished top of my class there. And I say that not to toot my own horn, but I got made fun of a lot because I studied a lot. But the good thing is when I graduated, I got to pick where I went, and I chose to come to Goodfellow Air Force Base for advanced training, and then I got to go to Hawaii for direct support, which is exactly what I wanted, because with direct support, you get a little bit of land and a little bit of sea. I did not want to go straight to a ship. Wanted a little bit of both. So everybody else, unfortunately, went straight to a ship. So I came to Goodfellow Air Force Base and realized I love San Angelo. I want to come back here someday and be an instructor. It looks great on your record. And so did my schooling here, got promoted again, and then went to Hawaii. I was in Hawaii for a year, and in that first year, I would deployed to Yokosuka, Japan. I was there on land during the tsunami. We felt the aftershock, and it was terrifying. I never want to go back to Japan, honestly. Um, we did not realize how bad it was. Everything in Japan just shut down. So what do sailors do when everything shuts down? We just went out on the town, and the next morning when we wake up, social media was getting big back then, and Facebook. We wake up to 200 notifications, everyone thinking that we've all passed away. We had no idea how bad it was. We woke up to pictures of Japan, half of Japan underwater, but we had no idea. So we get recalled back to the ship, and we spent the next couple of weeks doing recovery, search and rescue, but essentially recovery. It was very incredible, and in a way, it was a culture shock. I had never been out of the country, let alone worked with another country in recovery operations. I didn't do a lot of the recovery operations, but to see the culture of the Japanese people, the country, um, and them, I mean, they wouldn't even land their helicopters on our ships. They would just jump jump out of the helicopter, collect um, the recovery that we had, and load them up and take off again. They did not like us. They were there, but they did not like the position they were in. that was a lot. Just every couple hours hearing that, we have another one, houses floating by us. It was a crazy experience as a 19-year-old from Kansas. We know all we have is tornadoes in Kansas, so it was an experience. Um, while I was there, I found out that I was accepted to the Naval Academy Preparatory School, which was a goal of mine. I was my first time applying that I made it. Um, when you're already enlisted, you get most likely go to the preparatory school, which a lot of people don't know about, is in Newport, Rhode Island. So you go there with 35 other enlisted service members and about 250 high school students who did not make the cut straight into the Naval Academy. Um, it's not accredited, so you're there for a year taking physics and chemistry and other classes like that to prepare you for the Naval Academy. Um, it wasn't until this past year that I actually became public with my story on what happened to me there. But I was there for a year and I was in charge of restriction. So I wasn't the most liked person because they put me in charge under a gunnery sergeant. They put me in charge of students who got in trouble for like underage drinking and other things. And so I basically was their boss. I was like, in a way, I won't say a warden, but I was the boss of them and made sure they carried out their punishments. So these are my peers that I have to be in charge of. It was not fun. And it was also hard for me because then they prioritize sports and athletics sometimes over other things. And so when you see, a football player who can't either fit into his uniform or is wearing his uniform wrong, or like walking around with his like, maybe their certain clothing hanging out of their uniform. For me, it was very hard to see, like, do you know who has died in that uniform? And so it was a very hard adjustment for me, like that, to not be taken seriously. But they hadn't been in the military, so they really didn't understand. Um, but that was my first at the Naval Academy Preparatory School. I had actually begun, unfortunately, experiencing sexual harassment and hazing and by a supervisor, and I did not know what a victim advocate was at that time. Um, Ironically, this is when the movie Invisible War was released, and I reported it to. I didn't even report it. I just spoke to that person's supervisor and just asked that officer, "Can you please get this person to leave me alone? I don't want to report him. I don't even know how to do that. Can I get away? Can I get into a different division? Just like, I don't want to have to talk to this person. Like, please, like, here's the emails, here's the videos, here's the text messages." Um, well, what ended up happening is that officer went to that person in leadership and told him everything. And a couple hours later, that person in leadership called me in his office and told me, what happens when you go against what someone wants? Keep in mind, this person pulled me in his office by myself and shut the door and said, "You know what happens when you go against what someone wants? Everything just gets harder for you from there on out." And sure enough, it did. The next 3 months was a living disaster. That was my first time I had ever thought about suicide. I was chased down the hallway. I was locked in my room. I locked out of my room. I had an officer that would beat on my door when I had Post-it notes put all over my room. They put me on restriction. It was insane. They allowed other students to take videos and pictures of me. It was incredible. It was insane. 3 days before graduation, even though I had kept up with all my academics, I've passed all my physical tests. I've done everything to pass and go on to the Naval Academy. 3 days before graduation, I had never had a review that whole year I was there. They tell me that I'm not graduating and I'm not going to the Naval Academy, and they could not tell me why. I asked, "Well, why?" And their answer was, "Well, we don't think that you'll fit in." I said, "Okay, well, I mean, I don't understand. Like, you don't think I'll fit in? Like, I may not have bunch of friends here, but you also put me in charge of my peers and like restrictions. So yeah, like, but I do have friends. I did as a 19, 20-year-old. I mean, I just didn't understand, like, I won't fit in. We're not in high school. It didn't register. Um, there were a lot of teachers that were upset about this, and they actually helped me get some documentation. And sure enough, the individual that I wanted to leave me alone and the one I reported to were essentially trying to make me sound crazy. And so I had to check in myself to behavioral health, have them do a full evaluation. They reported that I'm not crazy and that I'm fine. But I appealed that decision and somehow I think it was a Friday that I appealed it. And somehow my appeal went all the way to the Naval Academy superintendent um, on a Friday. And I think he was on vacation in like Greenland or Iceland, and it came back down on a Monday morning as denied. So I don't believe that my appeal ever even left the office. Um, so I had to choose where to go, and I chose to go back to Hawaii because I was terrified. And I knew that in Hawaii, they saw me as a superstar and a number one sailor. So I felt like if I went back, nobody would question me. They'd be like, oh, Henry's back. Just put her back. Just get her back to work because she's awesome. And, you know, yes, like luckily, like thankfully, I never experienced sexual assault at that time, but um, the retaliation was just unbelievable. I mean, you took away an opportunity from me that I could never get back. And I appealed it. I reported it to the inspector general. And when I got back to Hawaii, I deployed almost right away because I was qualified and everything because I was already there before, which was not good. I was not in the okay state to deploy because I was still struggling with what had happened. Um, and they told me a year later that the IG had told me, well, my case fell through the cracks because I was deployed. So nothing ever really happened with that. So, now that that's happened and I'm watching that supervisor who was doing this to me, who was enlisted, now he actually goes through an officer program and now he's an officer. So the retaliation just like over the years just kept happening. It's like, so you get to go on and be an officer and I'm over here struggling to make it every day. And because of that experience, I had to be number one at everything. Because in my mind, if I'm number one at everything, nobody can take anything away from me ever again. To my peers and my supervisors from there on out, their perspective and the way they were reading it was, I just want to be number one because I want to be the best and I'm being selfish. I could not communicate and I could not share my trauma because I could not tell them what had happened. I had to say, oh, being an officer just wasn't for me. I don't want to go to the Naval Academy. Like, I don't know. They're too worried about football. Like, I had to continuously just essentially cover up, or I had to dismiss what happened to me or minimize what happened to me because I could not, not that I couldn't face it, but because I couldn't let it happen again. So to me, I had to continue to be number one at everything, which meant that I was exhausted. I experienced burnout. I didn't have a lot of friends because I worked all the time. But if you can imagine what it means to work to be number one all the time, you're not going to have a lot of friends. Nobody wants to be around you if you're always trying to be number one. Um, and it wasn't because I wanted to be the best. It was so if something ever happened to me like that again, everybody would question the person trying to take something away from me and not question me. Um, I got meritoriously promoted again from E5 to E6, and I was able to, in Hawaii, I deployed a third time. And my third deployment was great. My second deployment, the one after I left the Naval Academy, was rough. It was 8 months. I was only supposed to go for a month to get a qualification. They left me, I planned for 3 months. They ended up leaving me out there the whole 8 months because someone else went home and I stayed in his place because he wasn't mentally okay. I get that, but neither was I. And when I talk about my story, I tell people, because of what happened to me at the prep school, when you're standing out in the middle of the ocean and you're thinking about suicide and you're thinking about it's like, why am I even here? I told people that I would look out in the ocean and just kind of debate, do I jump close enough to the ship to get sucked in by the turbines? Or do I jump out far enough so I don't get sucked in by the turbines and let the sharks take me or I drown? Like, or, um, you know, do I wait till it's dark outside and then like slowly, um, do I wait till it's dark outside so I know they won't be able to see me? So I just kind of drift off and see what happens. And to have to sit there for months and try to go back and forth on which one would be worse or less, not as worse, not as bad. Um, and it not even bother me that I'm considering that. Like nobody should ever be in that position. Um, and to know that I was there and how many other sailors were there. On every single one of my deployments, someone died by suicide or died by something happening in ports that shouldn't have happened. That was preventable, in my opinion. So that was not a good deployment. I get back, I take over a training department, and I completely flip around how we train and monitor training of 500 sailors, and they loved it. They ended up implementing it throughout all of Hawaii, or not all of Hawaii, but all of our command. And then my third deployment, I had actually asked to go on. I knew I had about a year left in Hawaii, and I was like, I want to go on one more deployment. And I knew it was going to be 10 months. I knew it was on a carrier. So I've already been on a destroyer. I've been on an amphib with some Marines. That was a second deployment. And the third deployment, I was like, I want to be on a carrier. Like, I just want to get one more in before I go shore duty. And that's what this picture here is when I was on shore duty, on the USS Carl Vinson. So I think mentally I prepared myself, okay, the next year of your life, yes, it's a 10-month deployment, but the next year of your life is going to be on this ship. Prior to getting on this deployment, though, unfortunately, I experienced sexual assault and I tried not to let it phase me, just like, well, at least I'm leaving, and literally just shoved it down and said, okay, moving on, going on deployment. Um, and it was by someone that I thought was a friend. And so I went to go visit them and see all them before I left, and that was a mistake. Um, I used to say on my part, but obviously it was on their part. They made that choice. And so I did this deployment. It went great. I received some awards from some of the work that I did. I being on the carrier, the ships that are in the background. People think this is a backdrop. I'm like, no, those are real ships in the background. Um, I was not necessarily overseeing, but I was monitoring their collection, and there was a system that was not being used. And I was like, why aren't we using this system? Well, nobody knew how to use it. So I developed some training, taught myself how to use it, and then developed some tools and training on how to use it, taught everybody else on the other ships how to use it. We started using it and we started getting some record things like collects. It was amazing. And so it was a really successful, awesome deployment. Like again, on the way home, I got to see my brother. And then I found out I got orders to Goodfellow to be an instructor, which again looks great on your record. So I came to Goodfellow. This is my picture here at Goodfellow as an instructor. I was there for 4 years. I did, as an instructor, I'm a 25-year-old, 24-year-old E6 instructor. So I went E1 to E6 in about 5 years, and triple qualified in my warfare pins. 3 deployments. But now that I'm on land, something I did not mention is that in between my deployments, my little brother was living with me when he was 6 and 7, and then 9 and 10. When I got to Texas, he here at Goodfellow, he was living with me almost permanently. And throughout this whole time, I had been fighting to try to get custody of him. So as an instructor on land, I got a dog, try to live a normal life, bought a house. But I was again put in the position where I was in charge of some of my peers as an instructor supervisor. So now I'm in charge of people who are almost twice my age, been in twice as long as I have, 3 times as long as I have in the military. But I was qualified. I did all my qualifications. I got them done. Again, I'm still in that mindset that I had to be number one at everything, because if I'm like, you can't take it away from me, and I was in that survivor mindset, which is a horrible place to be in. And so it was difficult in the beginning, and my communication just was not good. I was condescending the way that I talked to people, because in my mind, I already had made a decision. Every day, my decisions were made. I didn't need your ideas. I didn't need your opinions. I already had it figured out. So thank you, but no, thank you. And I laugh like it's funny. It's not necessarily funny. It's just like unbelievable how your survivor mindset puts you there, and how it comes out and how you communicate with people. Um, and so my career, now that I'm an instructor supervisor, I was teaching day classes and night classes, also raising my brother, and he's not dependent. So the military doesn't see him as my problem. Anything I need to worry about. Um, but then my 2 nieces were also placed with my one niece was placed with me by CPS. In this time, I also got married, and unfortunately had some miscarriages, and then I um, started to experience domestic violence. You would think I've had my fair share. But because I knew the red flags, because at this point I had been a victim advocate after my experience at the prep school, I became a sexual assault victim advocate, which led me to being a social worker. I was, I'm not stupid. I said, I know what the red flags are. I'm not waiting around to have some broken ribs before I say, get away from me. So I separated from that person as soon as I could. And I had a full-term pregnancy. And so I had my biological son. But the girls, um, they were placed with me by the state, by CPS. But it came time for me to leave Goodfellow, and the Navy would not keep me here in Texas for another year. And I told them I need to stay in Texas so I could adopt the girls, and that they wanted to send me to Japan. And I said, this is the one time that I've asked the Navy for help. And them still not, like the Navy really still not understanding what I had gone through, and me finally asking for help for something and them not being able to do that. I'm at my 10-year mark. Do I stay in or do I get out? And at your halfway mark, there's a lot of questions, right? Like, what do you do? You know, do you retire? Do you reenlist? Try to keep going. I don't weigh it all on my nieces and adopting my nieces, but that was the one time that I really asked for help. And right before, about a year, 6, 7 months before I'm supposed to transfer, keep in mind that I'm pregnant and now single, a single parent with my little brother, and, and exhausted. And I actually truly experienced burnouts and had to go get help. And I just needed help, and I realized I just don't want to do this anymore. And when you have people your whole 10 years you've been in telling you you're going to be the first female this and the first female that, and you're going to do this, I just don't know if I want to do that. Like, I'm just exhausted. And also I don't mind intel, but I don't want to wait another 10 years to start my social work career. I don't want to wait another 10 years to start advocating for change. So, I decided to get out and stay in Texas so I could adopt my nieces. And when people started asking me, what about health insurance? What about this? What about that? Like, I was like trapped. I was like, okay, then I'm definitely getting out. I never want to be somewhere where I feel trapped. Um, and it wasn't until after I got out in 2019, and I immediately transitioned to a federal position as a full-time base sexual assault victim advocate. That it was almost like when you hear like adrenaline dumps from a high tense situation. It was like an adrenaline dump, and everything just like, woo, and it was a lot. And that's why I have Daisy as a service dog, is I just had some intense panic attacks that actually led to other health problems that resulted in me having some surgery. Um, and I experienced, unfortunately, some workplace violence after I left the Navy, that I'm still working through today. Um, but again, being it really, a lot of it goes back to my experience at the preparatory school having such a profound impact on the rest of my life and the rest of my career. Um, I mean, that led me to being a sexual assault victim advocate, which led me to just being an advocate in general, which led me to being a social worker. And so, um, I was a federal employee for a couple of years, and there's a lot of red tape. Um, it's someone who is a Gold Star family, and I always tear up when I say her name, but it's Vanessa Guillen. And, she's right. Her family was right up, she died right up the road from where I am in San Angelo, Texas. And I was actually going to put in the, I'll stop sharing. I'll actually put in the chat box, if I can, some names of some people, some service members who have died. And I also say their names, um, who do have Gold Star families. Specialist Kamisha Block, Private First Class Lavinia Johnson, Lance Corporal Maria Lauterbach, Private First Class Adrienne Bareilles, Private Nicole Burnham, Staff Sergeant Morgan Robinson, Private First Class Vanessa Guillen, Sergeant Elder Fernandez, and one that a lot of people don't know about that actually happened here where I'm at in San Angelo at Goodfellow Air Force Base, is Private Tracy Joy McBride. And these are all people that have died either by suicide or what we call murder by suicide, relating to sexual violence in the military. And being a sexual assault victim advocate on base as a federal employee, there's only so much you can do. So when I resigned, I started my own business, the Gold Beacon. I've worked with so many nonprofits over the last 15, 16 years of my adult life that I've just seen that they're out there doing so many great things, but they're also exhausted, and they also don't have time to stop what they're doing and do some strategic planning or do some grants management, write some grants or make a plan, build some timelines, do some marketing. And so I started my business so I could help take over that load for them so they could keep doing the great work they're doing. And a lot of the people that are my clients are organizations that serve interpersonal violence survivors, a lot of domestic violence shelters. I have a lot of military organizations, and this isn't a business pitch, but I say that because I realize that I can't save the world, and I cannot advocate on my own. Um, and I can't advocate for change for what happened to me on my own. But what I can do is I can help do what I can to help build the organizations like yours that are out there doing the amazing things that you're doing, and sharing the stories of others, to advocate for change and just to bring awareness. Like I said, with my service dog, the last picture I'll show you. I'll share my screen again. The last picture I'll show you, this is Daisy and I. This is San Angelo, and I got out of the Navy in February of 2019, and this is our first Veterans Day parade, November 2019. You can kind of tell, but her hand is on my hand, because we were sitting there and she knew I was obviously on edge. I'd never thought about being a veteran. And I don't know for all of you, but when you're in the military, you don't think about being a veteran one day. Um, you're private, or you're petty officer first class, or you're a chief, or you're a gunnery sergeant. You don't think, oh, I'm going to be a veteran one day. And so to be in this parade and see these people in uniform walk by me, and it just was very reminiscent of I'm not in uniform anymore. And it was a lot to process. Um, but you can see on her tag, one of her labels that she had, one of her patches that I got her, it's a teal ribbon, and it says not all disabilities are visible. Teal represents the color for PTSD and also sexual assault awareness. Because as I stated at the beginning when I first started speaking, is that the first question I always get asked about Daisy is, were you in the military? And the second question is, were you in combat? And I say yes to both of those questions. Sometimes there's people that are a little rude, and I think they're just being a little bit maybe disrespectful. so so if they ask a little bit in maybe a little not so nice way, then I'll also say I was also sexually assaulted, and that kind of catches them off guard. But um when I talk about, yes, I was in military service, it's very important for me because I've had people tell me, well, you don't look like you're injured, or you don't look like you were hurt, or you don't look like anything's wrong with you. Um, or you don't look like you've been in combat. Um, or I've also been asked, well, how can you have your master's degree if you need a service dog? How can you adopt kids if you need a service dog? How can you be a victim advocate if you need a service dog? How can you advocate for other veterans with mental health issues if you need a service dog yourself? Um, it's heartbreaking because it's 2024 and there's still this idea that people with mental health disabilities and mental health challenges uh, and veterans, that we're just incapable of anything, almost like we're just broken and we're just incapable of anything, rather than with the needed support. And it may not be lifelong, it could be a short time. I'm in my 30s, I don't want a service dog forever. Between me and my spouse, we have 6 kids. Having a service dog in the car, it's a lot of work. I mean, she has shoes she has to wear. It is more work than you think. And I don't want to always have a service dog. I hope one day I don't need her. But what I would like to do is I would like people to understand is that if we have the support and the resources and tools that we need, we're not incapable. We're not useless. We're not broken. Um, we just might need a little bit of extra support, and that looks different for everybody. What Daisy does for me is not what the next veteran might need a service dog for. People ask me all the time, like, does she bring me your medicine? I'm like, no, I don't need her to bring me my medicine. Someone asked me, well, why doesn't she open the door for you? I'm like, I don't need her to open the door for me. Someone once asked me, does she sleep? And I was like, I didn't understand the question. And I said, well, yeah, she sleeps. And they said, well, how does she help you? And I was like, oh, there it is. There's a mean question. And I said, well, she wakes up, and they kind of just still staring at me like I'm, the silly one. And I said, she wakes up. And this person is a young parent. And I said, have you ever woke up in the middle of the night because you thought something was wrong with your baby and they're not even crying? You just woke up because and then they were like, yeah. And I'm like, and they're down the hall in their own room. And they were like, yeah. And I said, okay, Daisy is trained to sleep at my feet on my bed. And dog senses are 1,000 times better. So if she senses something with my anxiety, or if I'm nightmares, or whatever she's sensing that's off, then she wakes up and she wakes me up. And she does her job. And so they were like, oh. So the second person that in this world, I don't even know how 2 people can ask that question, but the second person, like a year so later, 6 or 7 months later, I think, that asked me that, I just said, nope, I just plug her into her USB port and charge her up, and then she's ready to go. So I try to make it lighthearted sometimes, but it's just it's very important that people understand that, yes, I'm a female. Yes, I did combat service technically on a ship. We were dropping bombs. It was insane. Our flight deck was, I mean, it was like like a just piece of ice across our flight deck. We had no non-skid on our flight deck when we returned. I don't know how they did that, how that was allowed, because we were flying so much. It was so dangerous. We never got our flight deck updated, which, if you know anything about the Navy, if you don't have any non-skid and those jets are taking off and landing, that's very dangerous. But we were just flying I mean, we were doing so many operations. But no, I never did hand-to-hand combat. I've never kicked in a door. I've never held someone dying in my arms, and I cannot imagine, and I never want to imagine that. And I don't compare trauma. I don't say my life is harder than somebody else's, and I don't say someone else's life is harder than mine. We all have our own story and our own challenges, and we all handle things differently. But I know that I can't do what I do every day if I didn't have Daisy right now. One day I don't think she's actually about to retire. She's 9. She's about to retire, and I have a new one who's a 10-month-old yellow lab who is a lot of work to do, but she's a lab, so she's got quite a bit of energy. She's being trained right now, and it just is, my goal is to, it's unfortunate that I have to advocate for myself and other veterans instead of just having just being Kim instead of Kim, the one with the dog. But if that's what I have to do so other veterans or other families don't have to feel so much like the alien in the community, then I'm okay with that. So I guess to wrap up my story, um, I'm very grateful for my military service. It's 10 years of my life that, um, it's, I tell people it's a whole nother world. When people ask what it's like to sleep on a ship with 80 women in one little tiny space, and you have all of your belongings in the size of a suitcase for 10 months, like, I don't, it, can't explain it. You just got to do it. Um, I'm very grateful for the military, for that experience. I'm grateful, and I've learned a lot. I think it's important that people recognize that when I speak about military sexual trauma, yes, I'm a female, but that it doesn't just happen to women. It happens to men, to everybody. Um, and I don't speak about it to create a bad image on the military. I speak about it because a lot of people won't speak about it, but also because it's something a lot of people don't recognize, that when you ask or expect that a veteran or someone in the military is hurting is only because of their military combat. All you're doing is you're just kind of shoving that trauma even further down, and it's just going to fester and fester, and it's not going to get dealt with. And so I encourage people not to be afraid to talk about it. It's uncomfortable, but so is talking about someone dying by suicide, because nobody would talk to them about it. And so I'm happy to be here today again, and I thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions or thoughts that y'all have.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Kim. We could go on and on and on. There's so many parallels to things that you've mentioned that I'd love to see addressed. I have, over the course of my life, crossed paths with way too many female veterans who have experienced sexual trauma from other service members, that it's like, it's a problem that needs to be addressed better, and people need to take it more seriously. The idea of the mental health in the military, I've told it before. I don't have any shame in telling it now, that I personally dealt with suicidal ideation the entire time that I was in the service, and for many years thereafter. But I kept it inside because I knew that going to mental health, at least during the time that I served, meant my security clearance would be
Yep.
Flagged at the minimum. And that is a career killer. And so until that changes, most folks, in my opinion, are going to keep that inside.
Right.
So lots and lots and lots more. If you, let's throw the idea out and maybe come back another time to talk about specifics, and maybe other people that you might want to have talk about those kind of. So I'm going to open up to the group, so I don't want to hog the conversation just between you and myself. So I know we had Winston join us, and Godwin and Moshe join us while the story was in progress. Guys, your thoughts, your questions, your comments for Kim. Bob, do you have one?
My daughter has a doctorate in psychology, and she worked for the Veterans Administration
Mhm.
here in California. And she said it was a very, very difficult job. The amount of suicides amongst veterans is extremely high. Something like 25 veterans a day commit suicide a day. So it's very, she couldn't last, she couldn't stay with that job for more than a year or 2 years because of how, and back then, it was only what, maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Back then, everything, the Veterans Administration was run quite differently. And now they're paying more attention
Yes.
to veterans and suicide and all that stuff. But when you enter a position somewhere, the people around you want you to think like this with
Mhm.
tunnel vision.
Yes.
And that's when you have the opportunity. That's really when you should be opening things up to people.
Mhm.
Since then, the Veterans Administration has done a great deal to change their system of helping people, helping vets. And the irony of this, and I've mentioned this before in the meeting. My daughter told me it wasn't the younger people that were committing suicide. People, were veterans, then they had other jobs. And when they fully retired, that's when all the issues bubble up to the surface in your brain. And she says a lot of the older people
Yes.
that are committing suicide as well. There's 16 million veterans in this country.
Right.
When you talk about the numbers of people that are having psychological issues, it's over the top. It's over the top.
Yeah, and I mean, they've made a lot of progress, but if you look at anything VA, there's post 9/11, because there's so many post 9/11 programs. And then you see what's happening for the people before that. And not only before that, but when I came home, there was a whole parade for us, for my deployment. When people came home from other wars like Vietnam, we know there wasn't that for them. And I mean, I couldn't imagine. It's heartbreaking. And so when I see someone from Vietnam or any other, people tell me thank you for your service, and I just like it's hard for me to hear that. Honestly, I don't even know what to say. I actually tell people, ask, can I thank you for your service? Because
When there, I do want to put in one thing here. I heard somebody suggest when it's appropriate, because you can't do it in every situation, but when somebody says that and that they're being genuine about trying to be thankful to you, you
mhm,
look them in the eye and you say, you were worth it.
yes,
Because it brings it back to you and to that sort of
Right.
relationship. I personally am going to have to leave at here at the top of the hour. Bob, if you all anybody who can stay, because I love this conversation, I'd love for it to be able to continue on. But I did want to let you know that I am going to have to log off here very soon. I'm going to put my stuff in my contact information, etc., in the chat. I encourage everyone else to do the same, because one of the things I hope comes from this are connections outside of this. And so that's what we hope that the chat can do, is to help other folks, Kim,
Yeah.
Godwin, Moshe, Winston, to do. So with that, I'm going to say thank you all. Thank you so much, Kim. Powerful presentation today, and hopefully this is not the last time we're going to hear from you. So
Yeah, yep. I can stay on for a little bit if anyone wants to.
all right. Thank you all. All right.